In May 2024, a construction crew widening the Schwarzwald tunnel near Baden-Baden struck a reinforced chamber embedded deep within the bedrock. The chamber was unlisted in any post-war German infrastructure records and sealed with bolts stamped with the Reichsadler insignia. When state archaeologists broke through, they uncovered racks of corroded filing cabinets, gas canisters, and film reels marked Reichsforschungsrat, streng geheim. Inside, beneath layers of dust and collapsed concrete, were records referencing something called Project Morgenrot. Within days, federal authorities cordoned off the site and imposed a media blackout, but leaked photographs of the recovered materials, one showing a faded document labeled Cognitive Endurance Trials, 1944, Freiburg Division, ignited a quiet storm among historians. For the first time in decades, a fragment of Nazi science that was never meant to see daylight had resurfaced, and what it hinted at could rewrite the post-war origins of modern human enhancement research. Chapter 1. The Vault Beneath Baden-Baden. The official record begins at 0642 on May 11, 2024, when tunnel expansion Sector 7A of the Bundesautobahn 5 project was halted due to a ground resonance anomaly. Engineers believed they had hit an air pocket within the mountain, but geosonic imaging revealed a symmetrical cavity fortified with a steel concrete composite unfamiliar to modern German specifications. The coordinates, later logged as 48.739 degrees, 8,02285 degrees AE, placed the anomaly directly beneath a decommissioned wartime communications line once used by the Wehrmacht's 17th Signals Regiment. Within hours, local police sealed off the area, and the discovery was transferred to the jurisdiction of the Bundesamt für Verfassungsschutz, BF4. An internal memo, document ID BFV ARC 2024-511, classified the site under historical threat containment. When the entry hatch was breached, investigators found the air stale but intact, pressure sealed for nearly 80 years. The first team inside, equipped with filtration units and body cameras, recorded row upon row of deteriorated shelves filled with canisters, vials, and rolls of nitrate film. Some bore embossed serials beginning with MRG 43, later matched to the Reichsforschungsrat's Department for Experimental Neurology. Along the western wall, beneath a layer of collapsed masonry, was a rusted sign, Project Morgenrot, Versuchsanlage Süd. No official record of that designation existed in German wartime archives. Within the first 24 hours, 3 data drives containing digital photographs of the site were quietly confiscated by federal agents and replaced with official press releases referring to a sealed wartime shelter of minor historical interest. The leak came from within. A week after the operation, an anonymous upload appeared on a secure academic network used by European historians, showing high-resolution images of several documents recovered from the site. The most disturbing, File MRG 4317, outlined cognitive endurance trials involving chemical augmentation and forced environmental deprivation, with test subjects listed only by prisoner identification numbers beginning with KLD. Cross-referencing those designations revealed they originated from Dachau's experimental wing. A surviving laboratory log, dated February 1944, described the testing of a compound labeled NR-Stoff, a neurostimulant designed to extend wakefulness and reaction speed. Notably, one of the signatures at the bottom of the page matched Dr. Helmut Kramer, a biochemist later recruited by the United States under Operation Paperclip. Modern forensic teams, working under the German Federal Archive, began cataloguing the site's materials in late June 2024. Among the contents was a 16mm film reel sealed in a lead-lined container labeled Morgenrot, Phase 3. When digitized, it revealed grainy footage of uniformed officers observing test subjects in isolation chambers, each strapped to medical apparatus feeding them intravenous fluids, while strobe lights pulsed overhead. A narrator, speaking in formal academic German, references advances in prolonged cognitive resistance under fatigue states. The reel abruptly cuts to a black frame marked Transport Süd, March 1945, suggesting the project and its human subjects were relocated as Allied forces closed in. No record of Transport Süd exists in standard Wehrmacht movement logs. As historians dug deeper, the chain of evidence began to spread beyond Germany. Declassified US Army intelligence summaries from May 1945, specifically report TICOM 1945-112b, reference unsecured neurological research facilities within Baden sector, evacuated ahead of Allied arrival. An addendum notes the presence of American scientific attachés during early recovery efforts, likely precursors to Operation Paperclip recruitment teams. Yet none of the Morgenrot documentation appears in the Paperclip archives declassified in 2010. Instead, the name Project Sunrise emerges, eerily similar in translation, and linked to a small group of military scientists reassigned to Fort Detrick between 1946 and 1948. The compounds described, early analogues of modern neuroenhancers, bear resemblance to later US military pharmacological trials carried out during the Korean War. By late 2024, investigative journalist Lena Voss had pieced together enough fragments to attract international attention. Her article draft, titled "The Sleep That Wouldn't End," was never published. She vanished from her Freiburg apartment 3 days after requesting access to Federal Archive Inventory List ARC-MRG 2024-7C. The BFV issued a statement calling her disappearance unrelated to ongoing historical review, but her colleagues reported receiving anonymous warnings to stop pursuing the Morgenrot case. One of them later described finding a package on his doorstep containing an unmarked USB drive. Inside were scans of the original documents, along with one final notation in red ink. Phase 4 scheduled for continuation under Allied supervision. 1946, codename retained. Today, the entrance to the Baden-Baden vault remains sealed under permanent state control. The official line states the materials pose a contamination risk due to unstable chemical residues. Unofficially, satellite imagery shows a new containment structure erected above the original chamber, with military security assigned round the clock. Researchers who once handled the original files have been reassigned or have withdrawn from public view. What began as a routine excavation has become a silent geopolitical embarrassment, proof that even after nearly a century, fragments of war still whisper from beneath the soil. And somewhere in the classified corridors of Western intelligence archives, the words Project Morgenrot are quietly being replaced with a single English translation: Project Dawn. Chapter 2. The Disappearing Files of Project Morgenrot. By August 2024, the Baden-Baden discovery had grown into a controlled storm of partial disclosures and deliberate silences. Academic access was abruptly revoked under Article 10 of the Federal Data Protection Act, citing pending national security review. Yet a handful of historians, chief among them Professor Elias Brandt of the University of Munich, had already obtained digital copies of select documents. Within weeks, Brandt's private archive contained over 2,000 scanned pages from Project Morgenrot. Then, on September 9th, those files vanished from his encrypted university server. The access logs were wiped clean, and a notice of unauthorized intrusion appeared in his inbox. Within 48 hours, his faculty email account was suspended under the pretext of academic misconduct. Brandt himself would later describe receiving a letter with no return address, containing only one sentence typed on faded paper. The project was never terminated. Brandt's recovered notes, obtained through a whistleblower in 2025, reveal a troubling reconstruction of Morgenrot's internal hierarchy. The command structure listed 3 divisions: neurologische Anpassung, neurological adaptation, chemische Konditionierung, chemical conditioning, and Verhaltenskontrolle, behavioral control, each led by scientists later absorbed into Allied research programs. Among them was Dr. Helmut Kramer, whose personnel file shows post-war residency at Fort Detrick under the alias Henry Kram. Another, Dr. Ilse Eckhart, disappeared from German records in April 1945, yet re-emerged in 1951 as an advisor to a private pharmaceutical contractor in Zurich. Internal memoranda from Morgenrot's final phase describe subject retention via induced sleep state conditioning and chemical persistence beyond biological degradation. Brandt believed this referred to early experimentation on neural imprinting, an attempt to store conditioned behavioral responses chemically within the brain. The implications were extraordinary and deeply unsettling. Meanwhile, fragments of US intelligence, correspondence obtained under the Freedom of Information Act referenced a post-war operation titled Project Dawnlight, active between 1947 and 1953. The documents, FBI file series DL9472 and OSS microfilm R2506A, describe shipments of sealed containers labeled biological reagents. Origin, Freiburg facility. The transport manifests list destination coordinates pointing to an isolated testing site outside White Sands, New Mexico. Cross-referencing the serial numbers from the containers recovered in Baden-Baden revealed matching alphanumeric codes, MRG 4317C through 4322A. The same compounds tested on Dachau prisoners in 1944 had resurfaced, thousands of miles away, under the guise of American biomedical research. The name N-Arstoff, renamed Compound N7, appears in laboratory notes from 1948, signed by a Dr. H. Cram. The US government declassified only fragments of these reports, most sections heavily redacted. In the margin of one surviving page, a handwritten annotation reads, "Sustained cognition verified. Subject degradation at 214 hours continuous wake." By early 2025, Brandt was no longer speaking publicly. His university office had been cleared, and his research accounts frozen. The Federal Archives catalogue entry for AARC-MARG 2024-7C, the index of the Project Morgenrot files, was replaced with the phrase "Verlegt zum Sicherheitsarchiv," transferred to Security Archive. When journalists attempted to obtain the files through legal petitions, they received standardized denials, citing contamination hazards. Yet environmental assessments from the original excavation site showed no chemical abnormalities. Someone was concealing more than data. They were rewriting the official existence of the project itself. The only unredacted line from an internal correspondence between the BFV and the German Chancellery read, "The material is considered co-owned under the 1946 Allied Technical Recovery Agreement." In January 2025, Brandt's former assistant, a graduate researcher named Clara Hoffmann, published a short statement through an independent academic blog. She claimed to have retained a microdrive copy of several documents before the university network purge. Within 48 hours, the post was deleted, the domain seized, and Hoffmann's whereabouts remain unknown. However, cached data recovered by online archivists included one photograph of a document header, Morgenrot, Phase 4, Continuation Protocol, March 1946, London Agreement Annex. That date was significant. It placed the project's continuation after Germany's surrender, implying Allied authorization. The protocol described collaboration between selected German scientific personnel and an unnamed North Atlantic Oversight Committee. The file number, DOD SH 1946-33, corresponds to declassified paperwork from the nascent US Department of Defense, though no surviving document under that number has been found. What Hoffmann exposed was not a Nazi remnant. It was a handoff. The moral weight of that realization began to ripple across the historical community. If Project Morgenrot continued under Allied supervision, then the foundational ethics of post-war research, including medical trials that shaped modern neuroscience, stood on compromised ground. A growing number of independent investigators demanded access to the Baden-Baden vault, but by spring 2025, the site had been reclassified under NATO jurisdiction. Satellite imagery from April 2025 shows new construction atop the mountain slope. A sealed concrete dome surrounded by military fencing, its access road labelled Sperrgebiet A12. Official statements described it as a materials containment depot. No such facility appears in NATO infrastructure databases. What remains undeniable are the traces left behind in the archival void. The missing researchers, the erased file numbers, the mirrored terminology between Project Morgenrot and later Cold War, enhancement programs such as MKUltra and Project Sleep, Room, the linguistic similarities between cognitive endurance trials and the US Army's extended wakefulness study of 1951 are too precise to dismiss as coincidence. Even the compound's codename, N-Arstoff N7, neuroregenerative substance, appears in classified pharmacological indexes through the 1960s. Each fragment connects to the next, forming a buried lattice of inherited secrecy. The question is no longer whether Project Morgenrot existed, but why governments still fear its exposure. By the close of 2025, only one man remained publicly pursuing the truth. Investigative archivist Jonas Rehm, a former Bundeswehr intelligence analyst turned historian. Rehm had secured access to a retired American physicist in Tucson, Arizona, who once worked at White Sands under Project Dawnlight. The man, identified only as C, provided a single surviving sample of a chemical stored in a glass vial, sealed since 1952 and marked N7 cognitive agent. Within weeks of its retrieval, Rehm's Berlin apartment was burglarized. his research drive stolen and his communications severed. The vial, however, was gone before the break-in, forwarded to a private analytical lab in Basel under false credentials. According to one technician's anonymous statement, the compound showed traces of modified dopamine agonists stabilized with an unidentified binding polymer. When asked to elaborate, the technician reportedly said, "It's not a drug, it's a signal." The next phase of the investigation would lead REM deep into transatlantic archives, where names, coordinates, and redacted reports converged on one location repeatedly: an abandoned Allied laboratory buried beneath a psychiatric hospital in southern England, labelled on surviving maps as Facility 12B. Whatever was moved from Baden-Baden in 1945 appeared to have resurfaced there under a new codename, one that carried the same chilling meaning: Project Dawn. Chapter 3: Facility 12B and the Dawnlight Transfer. The coordinates first appeared in a 1946 memorandum between the US War Department and the British Ministry of Supply, file code SH-46-12B. The memorandum authorized the establishment of a joint containment laboratory beneath the grounds of St Albans Psychiatric Hospital in Hertfordshire, England. Its stated purpose: assessment of imported biomedical material. The letter bore the signatures of both Brigadier General Warren McLeod, US Army Medical Corps, and Sir Alaric Penrose, Chief Scientific Advisor to the Crown. No subsequent references to Facility 12B exist in British medical infrastructure archives, and aerial photographs from the period show nothing but forested land behind the hospital perimeter. For decades, its existence was a rumour whispered among Cold War archivists, until, in late 2025, a survey drone mapping abandoned MOD tunnels west of London captured an anomaly: a concrete entry portal half buried in soil and stamped with a faded US Army Corps emblem. Jonas Rem traced the site through overlapping coordinates found in declassified NATO logistics routes. Shipment logs dated November 1946 recorded 6 sealed containers marked Dawnlight Cargo, ferried from Bremerhaven to Portsmouth aboard the freighter SS Laramie. The contents were listed only as organic samples, chemical solutions. The consignee: Facility 12B. Using British National Archives cross-indexes, REM uncovered a matching requisition order for biomedical testing equipment, neurological adaptation instruments. The invoice number, identical to the shipment record from Bremerhaven, left no doubt. Whatever had been extracted from Project Morgenrot was transferred directly to British soil under US supervision, months after Germany's surrender. In February 2026, REM obtained restricted access to the St Albans district site through a cooperation loophole involving archaeological permissions. The official report he filed later that year, Preliminary Survey, Facility 12B UKA 26, documented a tunnel entrance descending 50 metres beneath the hospital grounds. The chamber walls bore US Army engineering markings alongside German stenciling that read Versuchsanlage Süd. The air was dry and heavy with ammonium residue. On the far side of the chamber, REM's flashlight caught rows of empty cylindrical cases, their serial numbers ending in N7. He recorded 37 cases in total, all opened. The floor was scattered with papers reduced to pulp by condensation. Yet among them lay an intact metal binder containing carbon copies of typed instructions. Commence phase Quafoy. Observer Penrose present. Data to be shared with Fort Detrick. It was dated March 1947. That discovery alone should have warranted international attention. Instead, REM's findings were buried in bureaucratic review. The UK Ministry of Defence denied any record of Facility 12B, classifying the coordinates as civil heritage land. But the photographic evidence he captured, still frames showing the Reichsforschungsrat insignia beside the post-war Allied seal, spread through encrypted historian networks by April 2026. Analysts confirmed the hybrid markings indicated a controlled handover, not confiscation. A joint Anglo-American scientific commission had effectively adopted a Nazi human experiment project into its own infrastructure. What they tested beneath St Albans remains one of the darkest blanks in post-war biomedical history. A breakthrough came in July 2026 when REM located a surviving paper trail buried in the Ministry of Health's Chemical Procurement Archives. Among standard anesthesia purchase orders was one anomalous entry: NR Stoff derivatives, Controlled shipment. Whitehall requisition 12B13, 1948. The supplier listed was Biocraft Limited, a front company later absorbed into Glaxo Laboratories. Internal payroll data revealed two names previously tied to Project Morgenrot: Dr. Ilse Eckhart and a chemical engineer named Dieter Hahn, both working under temporary clearance granted by the Allied Control Commission. Handwritten annotations in the margin of the order refer to neural resistance serum trials, St. Albans containment. For REM, this confirmed what had long been suspected. The compounds weren't destroyed or analysed for evidence. They were tested anew, under civilian medical disguise. When Rehm attempted to publish his interim report through a historical ethics journal in Berlin, he received a direct cease and desist order citing the British Official Secrets Act. Within days, his research credentials for NATO archival access were revoked. Yet in late September 2026, a sealed envelope arrived at his temporary office in Hamburg. Inside was a single, faded photograph showing a hospital corridor, fluorescent lit, with a sign in English and German, Cognitive Resistance Chamber, authorized personnel only. On the back, a handwritten date, July 1949, Facility 12B. The sender was anonymous, but the postmark originated from Cambridge. Rehm later learned that the same week the envelope arrived, a private laboratory owned by AstraMedica quietly filed a patent request for a long-term cognitive stimulant with regenerative binding polymer, listing the compound name as N7R by November 2026. Rehm had managed to trace descendants of several former hospital staff members. One, 82-year-old Margaret Lacey, the daughter of an orderly who worked at St. Albans between 1947 and 1950, recounted her father's warnings about a lower wing of the hospital off-limits to civilians. He spoke of foreign scientists with American guards and of patients who never appeared in hospital registries. Lacey produced one surviving note her father had written before his death. They make them stay awake down there. Days, weeks, always the same question, the same lights. The handwriting was shaky but legible. The note's authenticity was later confirmed by forensic analysts. In the following months, new information trickled in through anonymous channels. A former Ministry of Defense technician revealed that in 1962, during facility decommissioning, orders were issued to destroy all biological material from 12B and seal the tunnels. However, the technician claimed that not everything was incinerated. A crate labelled Morgenrot residual samples was diverted to a research outpost in Wiltshire under Project Aurora, an early cognitive warfare program focused on endurance enhancement. Those same records list the presence of compound N7, non-viable samples. But attached test results contradicted the non-viable claim, describing neurological activation upon thermal induction. Even in decay, the compound was responding. By 2027, the fragments of evidence had formed a grim pattern. From the Black Forest Vault to the English tunnels, Project Morgenrot had not simply survived. It had evolved, crossing borders and identities under new names. Dawnlight, Dawn, Aurora. Each incarnation mirrored its predecessor's pursuit of sustained human performance beyond biological limits. Governments had inherited a ghost from the Reich and kept it alive through secrecy. As Rehm prepared to present his findings to the International Ethics Council, he received a message routed through a military-grade encryption network. It contained a single attachment, a scanned intelligence report labelled CIA Tech Ops, Your 1952, Dawn Residuals. The summary line read, "Continuation approved. New directive. Integration with MK Ultra cognitive subprograms." That file was the bridge historians had searched for, a written admission that the Nazi-born Project Morgenrot had been absorbed into Cold War psychological research under US command. But by the time Rehm's colleagues opened the attachment to verify it, his secure server had gone offline. He was never heard from again. Only the uploaded backup of his notes remained. Time-stamped 02.17, January 3rd, 2027. His final entry was brief, typed in lowercase as if in haste. The dawn was not the end. It was the beginning. Chapter 4. The Basel Sample and the Missing Analyst. In February 2027, 6 months after Jonas Rehm's disappearance, the Swiss analytical lab that had received his package, Basel Molecular Diagnostics, was subjected to a sudden regulatory inspection. The lab's entire third floor was sealed, its records confiscated, and its lead technician, Dr. Adrian Keller, placed on administrative leave. The official statement claimed a biohazard protocol breach, yet no contamination event was reported to the Swiss Federal Office of Public Health. The following month, Keller was found dead in his apartment. His death ruled an accidental overdose, but a toxicology report later revealed no narcotics in his system, only traces of the same unknown compound he had been analyzing from Rem's vial, labeled N7 cognitive agent, batch 1952. The container itself was missing. Internal lab documentation obtained by investigative journalist Sophia Meinhardt indicated that Keller's team had succeeded in isolating the compound's structure before the raid. The file, encrypted but partially recovered, was titled Sample Report 7N Recon 1. It detailed a non-organic neuroreactive matrix that exhibited electrical self-organization when exposed to heat and oxygen, a phenomenon unknown in biological substances. The notes described microscopic filaments resembling neural pathways forming spontaneously in vitro. Keller wrote that the material appeared to simulate cognitive signals independent of host tissue. His last recorded remark, dated February 14, 2027, read, "It's not chemistry, it's memory." Meinhardt traced the source of the inspection order to a private security firm operating under contract with the US Department of Defense's European branch. The authorization code, EURE 2027-31 contingency clearance, was identical to those used for classified NATO biocontrol operations. When questioned by Swiss authorities, the firm denied involvement. 2 days later, Meinhardt's encrypted correspondence with a Basel colleague abruptly stopped. The colleague's account was deleted, and her home office was found stripped of electronic equipment. No police report was filed. By March, every trace of Reim's Basel connection had been erased. It was at this point that a second investigator entered the picture. Dr. Lydia Nowak, a Polish biotechnologist and former ethics consultant for the European Commission. She had been monitoring the Morgenrot Dawnlight case through underground archival networks and obtained Keller's deleted data fragments from a redundant backup server. Nowak's reconstruction revealed the compound's molecular architecture, an engineered lattice of synthetic peptides bound by metallic ions. But what startled her was the repeating data pattern embedded in the analysis. A series of numerical clusters that, when converted to ASCII format, produced partial German words, among them Versuch 12b, Experiment 12b, and Bleib wach, Stay Awake. It was as if the material itself carried encoded fragments of text. Nowak concluded that N7 was not merely a stimulant, it was a carrier medium for stored neural data, an attempt to chemically preserve human cognitive imprints. The implications were staggering. Project Morgenrot, long thought to be a physiological endurance experiment, might have been a prototype for memory transfer, a crude attempt to capture consciousness through biochemical means. Nowak's findings aligned disturbingly with fragments of Dawnlight documentation recovered from British archives in the 1970s, which mentioned experiential persistence testing on unrecorded subjects. In 1948, under the pretext of psychiatric therapy, Facility 12B had reportedly administered compounds designed to reinforce individual resilience through cognitive replication. The trials were abruptly halted after unexpected cross-subject contamination. The surviving reports were sealed under NATO Directive 1049A, accessible only to Allied intelligence agencies. By mid-2027, Nowak attempted to present her results to the European Bioethics Board. Within days, her communications were intercepted and her travel clearance revoked. Colleagues described her growing paranoia, her insistence that she was being followed by foreign observers. On June 3rd, she boarded a train from Warsaw to Geneva but never arrived. Surveillance footage later confirmed she disembarked unexpectedly at Karlsruhe Hauptbahnhof, the nearest major station to Baden-Baden, where the original vault lay sealed. 2 days later, local hikers reported police activity near the old tunnel construction site. No statement was released, but independent radio transmissions picked up encrypted military chatter referring to containment breach, Section Sud. The following morning, the entire valley was cordoned off. A week later, an unmarked envelope reached Meinhardt's Berlin office. Inside were printed screenshots from Keller's original analysis logs and a handwritten note in Polish. It remembers. The postmark was from the Karlsruhe district. She recognized Nowak's handwriting. The screenshots included a heat-mapped spectrograph showing low-frequency oscillations emitted by the compound as it decomposed. The frequency matched archived EEG patterns recorded in Morgenroth's prisoner experiments. When the two waveforms were superimposed, they aligned almost perfectly. Whatever N7 had been engineered to do, it was mimicking, or perhaps preserving, the neural activity of its human subjects. The next sequence of events unfolded rapidly. In late August 2027, a cyber intrusion targeted several European defense research servers. The attackers retrieved files referencing legacy biopreservation operations and Dawnlight continuation sites. Within 48 hours, a statement claiming responsibility appeared briefly on a secure darknet forum under the alias Helix 12B. It contained a single decrypted file, an internal memo dated 1954, signed by a senior CIA scientist. The line that drew global attention read, "Preliminary trials confirm persistence of cognitive signatures in compound N7 medium. Recommend indefinite suspension of testing until moral framework established." The file was authentic, but within hours of its release, every digital trace of the post was purged, and the hosting servers were seized under counter-terrorism authority. Those who had downloaded the document reported receiving cease and desist warnings referencing US federal statutes. One server administrator, operating under anonymity, claimed to have seen additional attachments before deletion, scans of handwritten tables labeled Subject 12B07, listing cognitive pattern retention times measured in days, not hours. The notation beside one entry read, "No physiological source. Signal persists post-mortem." By the close of 2027, the Morgenroth Dawnlight narrative had metastasized from forgotten history into an ongoing investigation. The recovered data suggested a continuity of experimentation stretching across 80 years and 3 continents. Governments publicly denied the project's existence, while quietly tightening data-sharing agreements between intelligence partners. Forensic analysis of the leaked files confirmed a chilling consistency. Identical serial numbering conventions from the Reichsforschungsrat through the US War Department to modern NATO defense labs. The language had changed, but the objective remained constant: control of the human mind through engineered persistence. The Basel sample remains officially missing. Keller's apartment was sealed, Novak vanished, and the Baden-Baden Valley remains restricted. Yet fragments of Keller's final dataset survive in encrypted form on mirrored drives scattered across private research networks. In one recovered log entry, he wrote a sentence in broken English, possibly a translation of an original German note found beside the sample. "It stays alive when we stop looking." To this day, no government agency has acknowledged the existence of N7, nor the possibility that a living chemical memory, born in the laboratories of Nazi Germany, might still be active, stored, studied, and quietly evolving under new names across the shadows of modern research. Chapter 5: Directive Dawn and the Final Redactions. The silence surrounding the Baden-Baden discovery should have ended with the Basel revelations. Instead, it deepened. By early 2028, a multinational task group calling itself the Joint Historical Review Commission, JHRC, was convened under NATO oversight to standardize classified archival materials relating to biomedical research, 1939-1959, publicly. The Commission's purpose was academic transparency. Privately, its founding directive, NATO INT 2028 Dawn, authorized the permanent reclassification of all materials linked to Project Dawnlight and antecedent operations. The wording was precise, sterile, and final. The same month, journalists across Europe reported a wave of quiet subpoenas targeting historians, whistleblowers, and former intelligence archivists who had touched Morgenroth documents. Files were seized, servers dismantled, and hard drives rendered unreadable by military-grade magnetic purges. To the public, the story had simply vanished again. Sophia Meinhardt refused to disappear. By late February, she had relocated to Prague, where she began assembling what she called the Dawn Archive, a digital reconstruction built from fragments recovered through academic mirrors, private email caches, and forensic data scraping. She worked out of a rented office above an old print shop near Karlovo na Městí, running outdated encryption software and keeping analog backups on microfilm. Over 8 months, she gathered every trace left by Rem, Keller, and Novak, connecting them through metadata timestamps. Her breakthrough came in April, when she noticed that a subset of the recovered files, labeled Dawn Residuals 1952-1957, contained consistent formatting anomalies. Hidden in the metadata of the scanned PDFs were latitude and longitude coordinates corresponding to a remote valley in western Norway. 61.0804 degree, 7,00907 degree. Satellite imagery revealed a defunct NATO radar relay station, decommissioned in 1973. On May 12, 2028, Meinhardt and 2 local researchers reached the site. Beneath layers of snow and collapsed rock, they uncovered a reinforced hatch bearing the NATO emblem and a serial code beginning with DWN-SF4. A rusted lock gave way to a chamber no larger than a small warehouse, filled with collapsed shelving and rusted drums. Many were stenciled, cognitive residue storage, authorized personnel only. Among them, sealed in plastic, was a single metal cylinder marked Batch N7R, Transfer 1954, Facility 12B Origin. Inside, according to later analysis, was a milky residue still chemically active. Meinhardt's field notes describe the air as metallic, charged, like static before lightning. Her camera footage ends abruptly after 37 minutes, the lens fogged and flickering. When the Norwegian authorities arrived 2 days later, the chamber had been cleared. Only boot prints and disturbed gravel remained. A week after the discovery, an encrypted email reached a secure historian forum from an unknown sender using the handle REM. The message contained 3 attachments: a declassified fragment from the CIA's 1956 Technical Operations Division, a Norwegian Defense Ministry memo dated 1958, and an unsigned directive titled Dawn Integration. Ethical Oversight Suspension Order. The directive confirmed that N7 research had been transferred to the Arctic facility under US supervision to assess non-degradative neural pattern storage. Paragraph 7 referenced compound persistence at 4 degree for indefinite temporal stability. The final line, later authenticated by forensic linguists, read, Directive Dawn remains active pending strategic application readiness. The date was April 4, 1958. Meinhardt's name vanished from public record that same week. Her last verifiable activity was the uploading of the Dawn archive to a distributed network under a Creative Commons license. Hours later, all nodes hosting the dataset were seized under digital security mandates from multiple governments. The official reason? Malicious biotechnological misinformation. Yet traces of the archive remain. Among its last entries are redacted transcripts from 1955 congressional hearings on psychological warfare programs, referring obliquely to legacy European assets with enduring biomedical intelligence value. Margins of those transcripts include handwritten notations by unidentified staffers, Morgenrot for Dawnlight, MK integration. By the summer of 2028, the story resurfaced briefly in a Norwegian newspaper that published a small article on the mysterious NATO chemical site near Åland. The piece was removed within 12 hours. Local police later reported the reporter's vehicle abandoned near a fjord road, engine running, doors unlocked. Inside was a notebook containing coordinates pointing back to Baden-Baden. Authorities ruled it an unrelated disappearance. Meanwhile, the German Federal Archive issued an updated statement reasserting that no record of Project Morgenrot existed and that any associations with Cold War biomedical projects are categorically unfounded. The statement was dated the same day NATO's internal server logs recorded mass deletions of all files tagged Dawn. That would have been the end of it. Another secret folded into the archives of history, if not for one overlooked artifact. In October 2028, a technician auditing decommissioned Cold War hardware at Fort Detrick discovered a mislabeled data reel in a steel cabinet, stamped Dawnlight, Cognitive Continuity Division, 1953. The reel contained recordings of synchronized neural signal data, intercut with test logs. One voice, speaking in clipped German accented English, repeated the same phrase over and over. Subject persists after cessation. Memory holds. We are learning to endure. The file header listed a single operator, Dr. H. Kram, formerly Helmut Kramer of Project Morgenrot. The continuity between 1944 and 1953 was complete. The reel was quietly removed from public archives within 48 hours, replaced by an empty entry tagged Destroyed for Contamination Risk. but a digital duplicate circulated briefly through academic encryption channels before disappearing again. Its closing seconds contained a faint audio anomaly, what spectral analysts later identified as a rhythmic pulse encoded in the background noise. When converted into a sonogram, the pulse formed a discernible shape, a waveform matching human EEG data during dream states. No official agency has acknowledged its existence, yet private researchers who've analyzed the copy insist the recording exhibits patterns consistent with active signal interference, as if something on the tape was still transmitting. Whether that's artifact or evidence remains unconfirmed. What's certain is that the legacy of Project Morgenrot never ended with the war. It evolved, it migrated, and under new flags, it was perfected. Today, buried beneath the bureaucratic language of defense contracts and neurotechnological patents, traces of Directive Dawn remain. Its files are still redacted, its records sealed, and its research somewhere likely ongoing. And if the final line of Kramer's recovered notebook is genuine, then the purpose of N7 was not to extend consciousness, nor to replicate it. The handwritten note, faded but legible, reads, "They asked us to build soldiers who never sleep. We built something that never forgets."